My wife looked me in the eyes, told me I wasn't ambitious enough, and walked out of our house holding another man's hand. That sentence sounds dramatic. I wish it wasn't true, but if I'm being completely honest, that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that for months afterward I believed her. I actually believed her. I believed I wasn't enough. I believed I had failed as a husband. I believed I had somehow caused the destruction of my own marriage. It took me nearly 2 years to understand what really happened, and by then, everything had already fallen apart. Not my life, hers, but before I get there you need to understand who we were, because nobody wakes up one morning and decides to throw away 11 years of marriage. At least that's what I used to think. My name is Daniel, I'm 39 years old, and for most of my adult life I believed loyalty mattered, hard work mattered, character mattered. The problem is that loyalty only works when both people value it, and eventually I learned something painful. Not everyone does. I met my wife Sarah when I was 25. Back then neither of us had much. Actually, that's being generous. We were broke, completely broke. The kind of broke where choosing takeout means checking your bank account first. The kind of broke where unexpected car repairs feel like a natural disaster. The kind of broke that forces creativity. Sarah worked as a receptionist. I worked in IT support. Nothing glamorous, nothing impressive, just two young people trying to build a life. And honestly, those years were some of the happiest years I've ever experienced, because everything felt real. Every small victory mattered, every promotion mattered, every saved dollar mattered. When we bought our first couch together, we celebrated like we'd won the lottery. I still remember carrying that ugly grey couch up 3 flights of apartment stairs. The thing weighed 1,000 pounds. We nearly dropped it twice. Sarah laughed so hard she couldn't breathe. At one point she sat on the hallway floor crying from laughter while I threatened to throw the couch out the window. That memory stayed with me for years, even after everything. Funny how that works. The happiest memories are often the hardest ones to lose. We got married 3 years later. Small wedding, nothing extravagant, no luxury venue, no destination ceremony, just family, friends, and promises, lots of promises. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder if she meant them when she said them. I think she did, at least in that moment. That's the complicated thing about betrayal. Sometimes people aren't lying when they make promises. Sometimes they simply become different people later. That doesn't make it hurt less, but it does make it harder to understand. The first 5 years of our marriage felt normal, comfortable, predictable, safe. We rented an apartment, worked hard, saved money, talked about kids, talked about the future, talked about all the things married couples talk about. Nothing felt broken, nothing felt dangerous. Then Sarah got promoted, and everything started changing. Slowly, so slowly that I barely noticed. At first I was proud of her, actually proud. She deserved it. She worked hard, stayed late, took extra responsibilities, earned every bit of success she received. When she got promoted to regional sales manager, we celebrated. Dinner, wine, dessert, the whole thing. I remember raising a glass and telling her how proud I was, and I meant it, completely. The promotion came with a larger salary, more travel, more networking events, more responsibility, normal career stuff. At least that's what I thought. Then she started talking differently, not dramatically, just little changes, little shifts, subtle things. The first time I noticed it, we were having dinner together. Sarah had attended some corporate networking event earlier that week. Most of the conversation revolved around people she'd met. Executives, entrepreneurs, investors, business owners, people with expensive watches and expensive opinions. Eventually she said something strange, at least it felt strange. Some people just think bigger. I remember looking up from my plate. What do you mean? She shrugged. Nothing, but it wasn't nothing, because after that, similar comments appeared constantly. People who think bigger, people who take risks, people who don't settle, people who want more. The language became repetitive, predictable, and eventually, personal. One evening she asked me a question that caught me completely off guard. Have you ever thought about starting your own company? I laughed, not because it was ridiculous, because it was random. Not really. She seemed disappointed. Actually disappointed. That surprised me. Why? She stirred her coffee, avoided eye contact, then said, I don't know, I just thought you'd want more. The comment bothered me for days, not because she wanted me to succeed, because of the implication, the assumption that what I already had wasn't enough, that somehow contentment was a flaw, a weakness, a failure. At the time I ignored it, another mistake, one of many. The following year brought even more changes. Sarah started spending time with a new group of people, co-workers mostly, successful people, or at least people who looked successful. There is a difference, a very important difference. Social media taught an entire generation how to look wealthy. Actually being wealthy is another matter entirely. Sarah became fascinated by that world. luxury restaurants, luxury vacations, luxury brands, luxury lifestyles. Everything became luxury. Sometimes it felt like she was studying a different species. Then one night she attended a company gala. I couldn't go, work emergency, server outage, one of those situations that couldn't wait. I remember apologizing repeatedly. Sarah said it was fine, no problem, no big deal. Then she left. At midnight she came home, excited, energized, almost glowing. I figured she enjoyed the event, nothing unusual there. Then she started talking about him, not by name initially, just stories. A successful entrepreneur, investor, business owner, self-made millionaire, the kind of guy magazines write articles about, at least according to Sarah. The first story sounded harmless, then came another, then another, then another. The frequency increased, rapidly, until eventually I realized something. She talked about him more than anyone else, much more. I remember joking about it one evening. Sounds like you're a fan. She laughed, but something about the laugh felt off. Not guilty, not yet, just defensive, which was strange because there shouldn't have been anything to defend. A few weeks later I learned his name. Victor Hayes. Even the name sounded expensive. Victor owned several companies, several properties, several luxury cars, several things. The man collected assets the way normal people collect coffee mugs, and apparently Sarah found him fascinating. At first I wasn't worried. Why would I be? My wife met successful people all the time. That wasn't new. What was new was her reaction, the admiration, the fascination, the curiosity. Every conversation somehow circled back to him. Victor said this. Victor owns that. Victor invested here. Victor traveled there. Victor thinks this. Victor believes that. I started noticing it. Then I started disliking it. Then I started worrying about it. Not because I thought she was cheating, because I felt something shifting, something changing, and I couldn't figure out what. The answer arrived 6 months later, in the form of a photograph. A stupid photograph, the kind that seems harmless until it isn't. Sarah posted it online. Corporate event. Dozens of people present, perfectly innocent, except for one detail. Her expression. She was standing beside Victor, smiling, and the look on her face wasn't admiration anymore. It was something else, something deeper, something dangerous. I stared at that picture longer than I should have, trying to understand why it bothered me. Eventually I convinced myself I was imagining things, again, because denial is comfortable, truth is expensive, and I wasn't ready to pay for it yet. The strange thing is, I wasn't the first person to notice, not even close. Someone else saw it too, someone who would later warn me, someone who tried, someone I ignored completely, and if I had listened to that person, everything that happened afterward might have been very different, but I didn't listen. Because when you trust someone completely, warnings sound like insults, not help. And by the time I finally understood what was happening, my wife had already made a decision that would destroy our marriage and eventually, her entire life. The person who warned me was my friend Mark, and the reason I ignored him still embarrasses me, because Mark wasn't one of those paranoid people who thought every marriage was doomed. Actually, he was the opposite. Mark believed in loyalty more than anyone I knew. He'd been married 20 years, never cheated, never even came close. The guy still held his wife's hand while walking through grocery stores. It was honestly annoying. The point is, Mark wasn't the type to invent problems, which should have made me listen. Instead, I got defensive. The warning came during a poker night. Just 4 guys sitting around a table losing money and pretending we knew what we were doing. The usual. Around midnight everyone else had left. Only Mark and I remained. We were cleaning up beer bottles when he casually asked, "Everything okay with Sarah?" The question immediately caught my attention. "Why?" Mark hesitated. That hesitation changed everything, because suddenly I knew this wasn't random curiosity, this was something else. "I don't know." Another pause, then, "She seems different." Different, interesting word, not cheating, not suspicious, different. I laughed, tried to brush it off. "Work stress." Mark nodded slowly, but he didn't look convinced. Then he said something that stayed with me for months. "Just don't ignore things because you don't want them to be true." I remember feeling irritated immediately, not because he was wrong, because he was too close to being right. And when people get too close to uncomfortable truths, we tend to push them away. That's exactly what I did. I changed the subject. The conversation ended. Life continued, or at least I thought it did. A few weeks later, Sarah started traveling more. Business trips, conferences, networking events, corporate retreats. The list never ended. At first I barely noticed. Her career was growing. Travel came with that territory, nothing unusual. Then I started noticing patterns. Certain trips always seemed connected to Victor. If Victor attended an event, Sarah somehow attended too. If Victor spoke at a conference, Sarah somehow ended up there. Again and again and again. One evening we were having dinner when she casually mentioned flying to Miami for 3 days. I frowned. Another conference, she nodded. Important networking opportunity. Networking. That word had become her favorite excuse. Everything was networking. Dinner, networking, travel, networking, late-night drinks, networking. Apparently entire industries operated exclusively through networking. I joked about it, she didn't laugh. Actually, she looked annoyed. That was new, very new, because Sarah used to laugh at everything, even terrible jokes, especially terrible jokes. Now she seemed constantly frustrated, restless, distracted, like her mind existed somewhere else. I told myself it was stress. Again, I blamed stress for almost everything. Eventually you run out of stress. Then reality starts demanding attention. The Miami trip lasted 4 days instead of 3. Her flight got delayed. At least that's what she claimed. When she finally came home, something felt different, not physically, emotionally, like she'd left part of herself somewhere else. I remember hugging her at the airport, and for the first time in our marriage, the hug felt unfamiliar. Cold, detached, temporary. It's difficult to explain. People who have experienced it understand immediately. People who haven't probably think I'm exaggerating. I'm not. When somebody emotionally leaves a relationship, their body often remains behind for months. That's exactly what happened. Sarah was physically present, emotionally not so much. Then the criticism started, small at first, tiny comments, harmless on their own, dangerous together. She criticized my clothes, my routines, my job, my habits, the way I spent weekends, the way I spent money, everything. Nothing escaped. I remember one Saturday morning I was washing my truck in the driveway, a normal Saturday activity, something I'd done for years. Sarah watched from the porch, then shook her head. What? She laughed, not kindly. You live exactly the same way you did 10 years ago. The comment confused me. Okay, she rolled her eyes, then walked inside. At the time I didn't understand. Later I would, because the issue wasn't my life. The issue was comparison. Somewhere along the way, Sarah stopped viewing me as her husband. She started comparing me to Victor, and comparison is poison, especially when one person has spent years building a fantasy. The more she admired Victor's lifestyle, the more ordinary I became, the less she appreciated what we actually had. That's the problem with fantasy. Reality always loses, at least until fantasy collapses, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The real trouble started when Sarah began hiding her phone, not aggressively, subtly, enough to notice, not enough to confront. Phone face down, phone always nearby, phone never unattended. Suddenly the woman who used to leave her phone anywhere treated it like a classified government document. One night we were watching television. Sarah left the room, her phone buzzed, the screen lit up. Just for a second, long enough for me to see the name. Victor, that's it, Victor, no explanation, no context, just Victor. My stomach tightened immediately. The message preview disappeared before I could read it. Part of me wanted to pick up the phone, part of me wanted answers. The larger part didn't, because looking would make things real, and I still wasn't ready for reality. Sarah returned, saw me looking toward the phone, then immediately grabbed it. Again, too quickly, much too quickly. The atmosphere changed instantly. Tension, awkwardness, silence, the kind of silence that feels louder than conversation. I finally asked, casually, at least I tried. Victor texts a lot. Sarah froze. Just for a moment, then smiled, too fast. Work, amazing word, almost as useful as networking. Apparently everything fell into one of those categories. I nodded. The conversation ended, but my instincts didn't. The following month was awful, not because I discovered anything, because I didn't. Suspicion without proof is torture. Absolute torture. You notice things, question things, analyze things, then convince yourself you're crazy. Repeat endlessly. Every day felt like that. Then came our anniversary. Our 11th anniversary. A date I'll never forget. Not because of what happened, because of what didn't. For 11 years we'd celebrated together, every year without exception. This year Sarah forgot completely. No card, no dinner reservation, no flowers, nothing. I wish I could say she remembered later. She didn't. I reminded her, actually reminded her, and even then her reaction hurt. Oh my God, not emotional, not guilty, just inconvenienced, like she'd forgotten a dentist appointment. I sat there staring at her, wondering when exactly my wife became a stranger. That night I barely slept, not because of the anniversary, because of what it represented. People don't accidentally stop caring. They stop caring long before the accident becomes visible. Then something happened that finally shattered my denial. A week later Sarah attended another corporate event. This one local, same city, no travel required. The event ended around 10. At midnight she still wasn't home. At 1 in the morning she still wasn't home. At 2, I received a text. Simple text, 5 words. Staying with friends tonight. That was it, no call. No explanation, nothing, just 5 words. I remember sitting in the dark living room staring at my phone. Something inside me finally broke. Not dramatically, quietly. Like a rope snapping after years of tension. Because deep down, I knew. Maybe not every detail. Maybe not the whole story, but enough to understand my marriage was in trouble. Real trouble. The next morning Sarah came home. Fresh clothes, perfect makeup, no apology, no concern, nothing, just normal, too normal. The performance had become almost insulting. Then she dropped the bomb, completely out of nowhere. We were drinking coffee when she looked at me and said, "I think we want different things." My heart stopped. Actually stopped. Because nobody says that casually. Nobody says that unless they've already made a decision. I stared at her, waiting, praying, hoping. Then she continued. And every word felt like a warning I should have understood immediately. I want more out of life. More. There was that word again, more, the same word that had been haunting our marriage for months. I didn't know it yet. But Sarah wasn't just talking about money. She wasn't just talking about success. She was talking about Victor. And within a few weeks, she was going to stop hiding it. Because the fantasy she'd been building in her head was finally about to become reality. Or so she thought. And when she finally walked out of our house, she would say something that haunted me for almost 2 years. Something so cruel that I actually believed it. At least for a while. And that sentence would become the foundation of the biggest mistake of her life. The day my wife left me should have been dramatic. At least that's how people imagine these things. They picture screaming, crying, doors slamming, maybe someone throwing a glass across the room. Real life is usually crueler. Because real life is quiet. Sarah destroyed our marriage while standing calmly in our kitchen holding a cup of coffee. No screaming, no tears, no visible guilt, just certainty. That's what I remember most. The certainty. Like she'd already rehearsed the conversation 100 times, like she'd already emotionally left months ago. Maybe she had. The conversation started on a Tuesday, ordinary day, ordinary morning. I had no idea my life was about to split into 2 parts. Before and after, Sarah sat across from me at the kitchen table, silent, watching me, the way doctors watch patients before delivering bad news. Immediately I knew something was wrong. Nobody develops that expression for good news. Then she said it. "I don't think this marriage is working anymore." I wish I could tell you I was shocked. I wasn't, not completely. Part of me had been expecting it. The signs were everywhere. The distance, the criticism, the secrecy, the emotional absence. The problem wasn't hearing it. The problem was hearing it confirmed. There's a difference. One is fear, the other is reality. I remember setting my coffee down very carefully. Like if I moved too fast, the entire world might collapse. "What are you saying?" She sighed, actually sighed, like the conversation was inconvenient, like she was explaining something obvious. "We've grown apart." That sentence, God. I hate that sentence because it's meaningless. People use it when they don't want to tell the truth. We've grown apart. Translation, there's someone else. I didn't know that yet, not officially, but I suspected. The suspicion sat between us like a third person. Then Sarah said something that stayed with me for nearly 2 years, something that poisoned my self-worth, something I repeated to myself hundreds of times afterward. "I need someone who matches my ambition." Silence, complete silence. I stared at her, trying to process what I'd just heard, because it wasn't just a criticism, it was a judgment, a verdict, a declaration that I wasn't enough, that somehow my value as a husband depended on my income, my career, my status, not my loyalty, not my love, not the 11 years we'd spent building a life together. None of that mattered. Apparently, what mattered was ambition. Or at least that's what she called it. Later I'd realize ambition wasn't the word she meant. The word she meant was money, lots of money. I asked the question anyway, the question every spouse asks. Is there someone else? For the first time all morning, she hesitated, not long, maybe 2 seconds, but she hesitated, and that's all I needed, because innocent people answer immediately, guilty people calculate. Sarah calculated, then she shook her head. No, lie. Absolute lie. I knew it, she knew it, the kitchen knew it. Yet somehow the conversation continued. I wish I could say I confronted her, demanded answers, called her out. I didn't, because even then, some stupid part of me wanted to save the marriage. Love makes intelligent people act incredibly stupid. The next week became unbearable. Sarah moved through the house like a guest, emotionally detached, cold, distant. Every conversation felt forced. Every interaction felt artificial. The woman I'd spent more than a decade loving felt like a stranger wearing my wife's face. Then came the final conversation. The real one. The one she'd clearly been working toward all along. It happened Friday evening. I came home from work. The house felt wrong immediately. Different, empty. Then I noticed the suitcases, 3 of them, standing beside the front door. My stomach dropped, instantly. Because suddenly everything became real, painfully real. Sarah appeared in the hallway, already dressed, already prepared, already gone, emotionally speaking. What is this? I already knew, but I asked anyway, because hope is stubborn. Even when it's dying. She crossed her arms, took a deep breath, then delivered the sentence that destroyed me. I'm moving out, just like that. 11 years, reduced to 4 words. I remember looking around the house, the photographs, the furniture, the life we'd built together, trying desperately to understand how everything had unraveled so quickly. The truth, it hadn't. The unraveling started long before I noticed. I was simply arriving late. Then she said it. The sentence that haunted me, the sentence that followed me into every sleepless night afterward. You've always been comfortable being average. Average, there it was, the final verdict. Average husband, average income, average life. Average future. I wish I could say I got angry. I didn't. I got hurt, very hurt. Because when someone you've loved for over a decade attacks your deepest insecurities, the damage lands differently. Especially when you're already vulnerable. Especially when you're already doubting yourself. Then she walked out. And that should have been the end, except it wasn't, because 15 minutes later, I saw Victor. I was standing in the living room staring through the front window, still processing, still numb, still trying to understand what happened. Then a black Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Luxury car, expensive, perfectly polished. The kind of vehicle that practically announces its own price tag. The driver's door opened. Victor stepped out. And suddenly every question disappeared, every single one, because there he was, the answer, the real answer, not ambition, not growth, not compatibility. Victor, just Victor the whole time. I watched him walk towards Sarah, watched him take her suitcase, watched him kiss her, in my driveway, outside my house, in front of my window. The sheer audacity almost impressed me. Almost. Then they left together, and just like that, my marriage ended. The following months were the darkest period of my life, not because I missed Sarah, at least not entirely, because I missed who I thought she was. Big difference. I stopped sleeping properly, stopped eating properly, stopped functioning properly. Work became difficult. Weekends became unbearable. The silence inside the house felt endless. Every room carried memories. Every object carried memories. The couch, the kitchen, the bedroom, everything. And everywhere I looked I saw failure. My failure, or at least that's what I believed. Remember that sentence. You've always been comfortable being average. It became a parasite, living inside my head, repeating constantly. Average, average, average. I started comparing myself to Victor. Terrible idea. The guy owned luxury properties, businesses, investments, sports cars, everything. Meanwhile, I owned a mortgage and a broken heart. Not exactly a fair competition. Social media made it worse, much worse. Because Sarah suddenly transformed into someone I barely recognized. Private jets, luxury hotels, fine dining, designer handbags, exotic vacations. The highlights never stopped. Apparently she'd achieved the life she always wanted. At least that's what it looked like. And honestly, watching it nearly destroyed me, not because I wanted the luxury, because I felt replaced, upgraded, discarded, like an old phone somebody traded in for a newer model. The humiliation was brutal. Then it got worse, because family and friends started asking questions. Awkward questions, painful questions, questions I couldn't answer. What happened? Why did she leave? Are you okay? The worst one was always, did you see it coming? No, I didn't, and admitting that made me feel stupid, weak, naive. Mark became my lifeline during that period, the same friend who warned me, the same friend I ignored. Every week he checked on me. Every week he dragged me out of the house. Every week he reminded me to keep moving. One night, about 6 months after Sarah left, he said something important. Something I didn't understand at the time. People who chase appearances eventually meet reality. I laughed because it sounded like a motivational poster. Mark laughed too. Then he said, I'm serious. I shrugged. Looks like reality is working out pretty well for her. He didn't answer, not immediately. Instead he stared at his beer, then smiled. A strange smile. The kind of smile people wear when they know something you don't. And what I didn't know, what absolutely nobody had told me yet, was that Victor's perfect life wasn't real, not completely. The money was real, the cars were real, the houses were real, but everything else, not so much. Because while Sarah was busy living inside a fantasy, cracks were already forming, dangerous cracks, and within the next year those cracks would become impossible to hide. The problem for Sarah was simple. She thought she'd left an average man for a perfect one. She had no idea she was walking into the biggest mistake of her life. For the first year after Sarah left, I obsessed over Victor, not openly, not in a crazy ex-husband way, at least I don't think so, but every time someone mentioned his name I paid attention, every social media post, every rumor, every update. I hated that about myself, because deep down I knew it wasn't healthy, yet I couldn't stop. The man hadn't just taken my wife, he'd replaced me, or at least that's how it felt. And when someone replaces you, your brain starts searching for answers. What did he have that I didn't? What made him better? What made me not enough? Those questions followed me everywhere. The gym, work, the grocery store, the shower, 3 in the morning, everywhere. Meanwhile, Sarah looked happier than ever. At least online, the photos never stopped. Luxury resorts, wine tastings, private beaches, designer stores, rooftop restaurants. Every image looked like an advertisement for success. And every time I saw one, that word echoed inside my head. Average. The word she used before leaving. Average. I started working longer hours, not because I needed money, because I needed distraction. Distraction was easier than grief. The problem with grief is that it demands attention eventually. No matter how hard you run, eventually it catches up. Mine caught up one rainy Thursday evening. I was cleaning out a closet, one of those tasks you've been avoiding forever. Old boxes, old photographs, old memories, the kind of stuff people keep without knowing why. Then I found our wedding album. For a few seconds I just stared at it, didn't open it, didn't touch it, just stared, because suddenly I realized something. The woman in those photographs wasn't the woman who left, and maybe that was the problem. I'd spent an entire year grieving someone who no longer existed. That realization changed everything, not immediately, but enough. The next morning, I deleted Sarah from social media. Every platform, every account, every connection. Gone. It sounds small, it wasn't, it felt like cutting an oxygen line. Painful, necessary, long overdue, and strangely, life got quieter afterward, not easier. Just quieter. The comparisons started fading, the obsession started fading, the constant reminders disappeared. For the first time in months I could actually hear my own thoughts again. Then something unexpected happened. My career exploded. Not literally, obviously, but professionally. Things changed fast, very fast. A software company I'd been consulting for offered me a senior position. Better salary, better benefits, better opportunities. Ironically, it was the exact kind of career growth Sarah claimed I never wanted. The difference? I wasn't doing it for validation anymore. I was doing it because I genuinely wanted it. Funny how motivation changes when you're no longer trying to prove yourself to someone else. About 18 months after the divorce, I bought a new house. Not a mansion, not a luxury estate, just a beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place that feels peaceful, the kind of place that feels earned, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt proud of my life again. Then Chloe called, not my ex-wife's sister, my cousin Chloe, different Chloe, and the second I saw her name I knew something was wrong. She wasn't the type to call randomly. Hey, her voice sounded hesitant, careful, like someone carrying fragile information. You sitting down? My stomach immediately tightened. That question is never followed by good news. What happened? Long pause, then she said, Sarah's not doing great. Silence. The name alone felt strange now, distant, like hearing about someone from another lifetime. What do you mean? Another pause, then. Victor, just one word, Victor, and suddenly I was listening very carefully. Apparently things weren't as perfect as social media suggested. Shocking, I know, according to my cousin. Victor had changed dramatically after Sarah moved in. Or maybe he hadn't changed at all. Maybe the performance ended. That's the thing about affairs. People meet the best version of each other, the curated version, the exciting version, not the real one. Reality comes later. Sarah was finally meeting reality, and reality wasn't impressed. The first issue was control. Victor controlled everything: money, schedules, travel, decisions, everything. The luxury lifestyle wasn't really hers, it belonged to him, which meant he could take it away whenever he wanted, and apparently, he reminded her of that constantly. The second issue was worse, much worse. Victor cheated, regularly, openly, shamelessly. The irony was almost unbelievable. Sarah destroyed her marriage for a man who couldn't remain faithful for 6 months. I wish I could say I felt satisfaction. I didn't, at least not immediately. Mostly I felt stunned. Because for years I'd imagined Victor as some larger-than-life figure, the perfect replacement, the superior option. Turns out he was just another selfish guy with money, a lot of money, but still, just a guy. Then my cousin dropped another bombshell. Sarah had discovered messages, Lots of messages, multiple women, some relationships overlapping, some apparently ongoing for years. Years. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. The woman who left me believing she'd found something extraordinary had apparently become one more name on a very long list. Then it got worse, because Victor wasn't just cheating. He was using people, specifically women. A pattern started emerging. Successful, divorced, lonely, vulnerable. He'd sweep into their lives, love bomb them, spoil them, then gradually isolate them, control them, use them, move on, rinse and repeat. The guy practically had a business model, and Sarah had fallen for it completely. The next few months brought more rumors, more stories, more revelations. Apparently Victor's reputation within certain circles was terrible, absolutely terrible. The reason Sarah never heard those stories, because she only listened to people who admired wealth, not people who understood character. There's a difference, a huge difference. Then came the lawsuit, the first public crack. One of Victor's former business partners sued him, then another, then another. Suddenly articles started appearing online. Financial disputes, questionable practices, investigations, nothing criminal, not yet, but ugly, very ugly. The perfect image started crumbling, and with it, Sarah's fantasy. I didn't hear directly from her, not at first. Instead, information arrived through mutual friends, mutual acquaintances, people who still occupied both worlds. According to everyone, Sarah looked miserable, exhausted, stressed, older. The luxury remained, the happiness disappeared. Funny how those aren't the same thing. One evening Mark came over for dinner. We were sitting on the back patio drinking beer when he casually asked, "Have you heard about Sarah?" I nodded. "A little." Mark laughed, then shook his head. "Ironic, isn't it?" "Very ironic. The woman who accused me of lacking ambition had attached herself to a man whose entire personality was built on appearances. And now those appearances were collapsing." Then Mark said something important, something I'd eventually realize was true. People who leave good people chasing fantasies usually end up disappointed. At the time, I thought he was oversimplifying. Life isn't that neat. Reality isn't that poetic. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Something made me answer. Big mistake. Or maybe the most important moment of the entire story. Because the voice on the other end belonged to Sarah. And I immediately knew something was wrong. Very wrong. She sounded different, smaller, weaker. The confidence was gone, the certainty was gone, the superiority was definitely gone. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "Daniel." Just hearing my name in her voice felt strange, like opening a door to a room I'd sealed shut years ago. "What do you want?" Silence, long silence. Then, "I need to talk to you." My stomach tightened instantly. Because people don't make that call when life is going well. They make that call when everything is falling apart. And judging by her voice, everything was. The problem was, I had absolutely no idea how bad things had become, or why she was calling me instead of Victor, but I was about to find out. And the truth was far bigger than cheating, far bigger than regret, far bigger than heartbreak, because the empire Sarah left me for was collapsing, and she was standing directly underneath it. The first thing I noticed about Sarah's voice was the fear, not sadness, not regret, fear, real fear, the kind of fear people can't fake. And after everything she'd done that should have made me feel satisfied, it didn't, it just made me curious. Because the Sarah who left me wasn't afraid of anything. She was confident, certain, convinced she'd made the right choice. The woman on the phone sounded completely different, like someone standing in the middle of a burning building. "Daniel." Long pause. "I really need to talk to you." I stared out the kitchen window, watching rain slide down the glass, thinking. A part of me wanted to hang up, a very large part, but another part wanted answers. After nearly 2 years, I deserved answers. "Fine." Her relief was immediate, almost painful to hear. We agreed to meet the following afternoon. Small coffee shop, neutral location, public place, no emotional history attached to it. That night I barely thought about it, which surprised me. A year earlier I would have obsessed over every detail. Now, not so much, because something important had changed. I no longer needed Sarah. And when you stop needing someone, you start seeing them clearly. The next afternoon I arrived early. Old habit. 15 minutes later Sarah walked in, and honestly I barely recognized her. Not physically, she still looked like Sarah, but the energy was gone, the confidence, the superiority, the excitement, gone. Completely gone. The woman who left me looked exhausted. She sat down slowly. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then she started crying, not dramatic crying, not manipulative crying, just exhausted crying. The kind that comes after months of holding everything together. And for the first time, I realized something. She wasn't calling because she missed me. She was calling because her world was collapsing. Then she started talking, and every minute made the story worse. Apparently Victor's business empire wasn't nearly as stable as it appeared. Several companies were struggling, investments were failing, lawsuits were growing, debt was piling up. The luxury lifestyle everyone admired, mostly financed, mostly leveraged, mostly illusion. The cars, the vacations, the penthouses, the private flights, everything built on debt, built on image, built on appearances. Exactly the kind of thing Sarah used to accuse me of lacking. Ambition. Turns out she confused ambition with performance. Very expensive mistake. Then she told me something that genuinely shocked me. Victor had never planned to marry her. Not once. Not ever. For 2 years she'd believed they were building a future. Victor believed they were having fun. Huge difference. Massive difference. Apparently she'd recently discovered messages. Hundreds of messages. Multiple women. Ongoing relationships. Some overlapping for years. Others completely hidden. The same way she'd hidden her relationship with him from me. The irony wasn't subtle. Then came the real bombshell. Victor was preparing to leave, not because he felt guilty. Because he'd found someone else. Someone younger, someone newer, someone exciting. The same cycle repeating itself. Again. And suddenly Sarah understood what she'd done. Not because she grew wiser. Because she finally became the person being replaced. The realization destroyed her. I listened quietly, not interrupting, not judging, just listening. Eventually she looked up, eyes red, voice shaking, and asked the question I knew was coming, the question behind the entire meeting. Do you hate me? I thought about it honestly, really honestly, then shook my head. No, and it was true, I didn't hate her anymore. Hatred requires energy, time, emotion. I'd spent all of that already. What remained wasn't hatred, it was distance, a huge difference. Sarah started crying again. Then she asked another question, a more dangerous one. Do you think people can make terrible mistakes and still deserve forgiveness? There it was. The real reason she'd called, not information, not closure. Hope. She was looking for hope, looking for a way back, not necessarily into the marriage, into my life, back toward safety, back toward certainty, back toward the man she left. The problem. That man didn't exist anymore. She had helped destroy him. And in his place stood someone else, someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who finally understood his own worth. Then Sarah said something that would have meant everything 2 years earlier. I made the biggest mistake of my life. Silence. Then I should have never left. For a moment I just sat there, looking at her, thinking about everything, the apartment, the wedding, the house, the promises, the lies, the affair, the humiliation, the loneliness, all of it. And honestly, I believed her. I truly did. I believed she regretted it. I believed she was sorry. I believed she understood. The problem was, understanding comes after consequences, not before. Then she asked the question every viewer probably saw coming. Can we try again? There it was, finally, the thing she'd been building toward, the thing she hoped this meeting would become. A second chance, a restart, a return. I looked at her for a long time, long enough that tears started forming in her eyes again. Then I answered, no, not angry, not cruel, just honest. The word landed like a hammer. She closed her eyes immediately because deep down, she already knew. Still, hearing it hurt. I understand. For a second I thought the conversation was over. Then Sarah surprised me. She nodded slowly, wiped her eyes, and actually smiled. Small smile, sad smile, but genuine. Then she said something I'd waited years to hear, something I never thought would come. You were never average. Silence. I just couldn't see it. And there it was. The sentence that finally killed the ghost I'd been carrying around. For 2 years I'd replayed her words. Average, average, average. Now the person who created the wound was admitting it had never been true. Funny how life works. The validation I desperately wanted arrived exactly when I no longer needed it. After we left the coffee shop I never saw Sarah again, not in person. A few updates reached me over the years. Victor's empire eventually collapsed, not dramatically, just slowly. Lawsuits, debt, investigations, business failures. One by one, the illusion disappeared, exactly the way illusions always do. Eventually Sarah moved to another city, started over, smaller apartment, normal job, normal life, reality. As for me, life became surprisingly good, not perfect, just good, peaceful, stable, real. I continued advancing professionally, bought another property, traveled, made new friends, built a life that actually belonged to me. Not one designed to impress strangers, one designed to make me happy. The biggest surprise came 3 years later, when I met someone new. Her name was Emma, and unlike Sarah, Emma never asked how much money I made, never compared me to other men, never treated success like a competition. Instead, she cared about things that actually mattered: integrity, character, kindness, reliability. Funny enough, the exact qualities Sarah eventually realized she'd thrown away. One evening, Emma and I were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. Nothing special, no luxury yachts, no private jets, no million-dollar views, just peace, simple peace. And suddenly I remembered something Sarah once said: "You seem comfortable being average." For years I'd treated those words like a weapon. Then I realized something. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was comfortable with honesty, comfortable with loyalty, comfortable with stability, comfortable with building something real. And honestly, I wouldn't trade that for all of Victor's money. Because in the end, Sarah chased the appearance of success. I chose the substance of it. And when reality finally arrived, only one of those things survived. Looking back now, I don't think the biggest lesson was about cheating, or betrayal, or money. The biggest lesson was this: never let someone else's inability to see your value convince you that you don't have any. Because sometimes people leave not because you're lacking, but because they're chasing an illusion, and eventually, illusions always collapse. The question is whether they realize it before it's too late. Sarah didn't. And by the time she finally understood what she'd lost, I was already gone.